Who Wants to Be a Millionaire began in 1997, and it was a huge hit, gripped the nation. If you were alive at that time, you probably watched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. At one time, a third of the UK were watching that show. It won every award every year. It was a huge success, I think, because of its simplicity. You know, it got back to basics. It wasn't doing crazy stuff, jumping off a mountain. It was a quiz. And you get to know about the origin story of where that came from, and it's important that you know that, so you know why the channel was so invested in the show. And it's the story of, it's known as the coughing major story, which doesn't make any sense because it wasn't the major, Charles, who was coughing, but anyway. And it's a story of Charles and Diana Ingram, who were criminally convicted for cheating their way to £1 million on that show. A book came out, I believe, in 2014 called Bad Show, which James Graham, who's our brilliant writer, he was obsessed with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and he was obsessed with this scandal at the time. And so when this book came out, he jumped on it, and this book raised contentious issues about the trial and the press coverage and all the things that were involved in that, and it fascinated James enough for him to write a play called Quiz, which was on in the West End. Well, it started at Chichester Festival, and then it came to the West End, and he's now developed it into this TV show, and I get to play Diana. She's incredibly sweet and really into quizzes in a big way. Yeah, not at all, I think, how she was portrayed by the press. And I hope we've captured some of that. I remember the furore around the show that, Paul Smith describes it as, or David Lidderman actually describes it as event television. Like, that's what they wanted to create. And it was unprecedented that they stripped a week out of their schedule to play it every single night. And it did become what someone referred to as appointment television, where you just wouldn't miss it. And I think there's something about the game that feels so achievable. But also at that time, it was the biggest amount of money that had ever been given away on a game show. We have a different relationship with £1 million now than we did then. It's still a lot of money, but it was an extortionate amount of money then. And it just felt so easy in a way. You just had to answer 15 questions and you could win. And also it was multiple choice, so you were being given the answer. And there's something that's so deliciously tempting about that. You can see why it became so, universal as a show, and something that resonated with so many people because everyone could participate. And that's certainly how Diana got involved in the show and loved quizzes anyway. But this was, you could come away with a lot of money. And so I remember that. I remember the scandal. It was everywhere. The press coverage was insane and possibly out of proportion to what was going on. And we sort of examine that moment in history. And James does this so brilliantly. He does this with all of his work, where he sort of laces, things that are politically topical in things that he's writing about now, or what's happening now. He'll relate it somehow to then, and he thinks that this period in history. I mean, Charles actually, when he won the million, it was 2 days before 9/11, and so I know that James is very interested in that period of history in terms of how it's affected our relationship to the truth now, and he believes that the beginnings of that, the seeds of that, were happening around then, and so he's written that into the show, and he always does that so brilliantly because he does it subtly. He doesn't smash you over the head with it. He just plants little seeds of truth. I just watched as much footage as there was available repeatedly. There is this Martin Bashir documentary that came out 2 weeks after they were convicted, which explains to the audience how they did it, and there's no other side to that story. So I stayed away from that one. I did watch it because there's great footage of them, but I didn't want to get too involved in it because it's very biased. But there's another documentary, a Fiona Bruce one, that was made a year later, which is much shorter, but it's filming them at home, and that I found an enormous help. And also just speaking to James, who got to know the Ingrams really well, and just the usual sort of reading and all of that. I think what people will come to discover about the Ingrams and what they experienced will be very shocking, actually. They were persecuted, they're still persecuted, as you say, nearly 20 years on, and I think that's extremely disproportionate to what actually happened.